So we have the great pleasure to welcome Christelle Schmidt for the coming seminar. Christelle is one of the few physicists who is a specialist in the process of fission, both in theory and in experiment points of view. She defended her PhD thesis in Strasbourg University in 2002 under the co-supervision of Johan Bartel and Christoph Pomorski. And the subject was the development of a dynamical model for low energy fission reactions from both theoretical and experimental aspects. Then she moved to a postdoctoral position at GSI with Karl-Heinz Schmidt, and she was still working on the fission process, but at that time at the higher excitation energy. And then she entered a CNRS position at IPN Lyon in 2003 and moved to Ganil in 2007, where she stayed 10 years, being spokesperson of two experiments improving her knowledge in fission process and providing the task of what we call physicien d'accueil au Ganil. She analyzed herself the experimental data performed with the VAMOS spectrometer and compared them in the frame of the theory that she developed within different international collaborations. More recently, in 2017, she went back in Alsace and joined the nuclear physics group of IPHC Strasbourg. She continuously improves the theoretical and experimental approaches of the fission process and works in collaboration with physicists in Poland, GSI, New Delhi and Mumbai, and Los Alamos. She is also fully involved in different experiments and projects like the VAMOS++ spectrometer and the Paris collaboration. Over the years, Christelle became a reference physicist in the field of fission at the international level. Her last publication in PRL on the fission of a neutron-deficient mercury nucleus revealed that neutrons have no influence on the deformation that leads the nucleus to fission, and these parameters depends essentially on protons. And she will now explain us all the secret of the fission process, so during this seminar. So the title is a new insight into fission from recent experiment, what drives fission across the nuclear chart. So Christelle, thanks for giving this seminar, and the microphone is yours now.
Ok, merci Olivier. Donc, bonjour à tout le monde. Good afternoon, everyone. So now I just switch off, if you don't mind, the camera, and I go to the slides. Voilà. Okay, so I will here in this presentation, as Olivier said, try to give an update about our knowledge on fission as extracted from most recent experiments and covering an as large as possible domain of the nuclear chart, from lowly to highly fissile system. Somehow this presentation may be biased a bit by my personal experience in the field, which is of course not exhaustive, so I apologize already for this in advance. Whoops, now it should work. Okay. So fission corresponds to one of the most dramatic radioactive decay, whereby a heavy nucleus splits into two fragments, but still heavy products, which we call the fission fragments. Macroscopically, it resembles much the division of a liquid cell or a living cell, if you wish, but hidden behind is a complex rearrangement of a many-body quantum system involving two types of nucleons, the protons and the neutrons. As such, the process constitutes a rich laboratory for studying nuclear properties and the dynamics, of course. At the same time, fission is very important for other disciplines, various other disciplines, such as astrophysics and social application. As for today, I will focus on fission at low excitation energy, as it is best to illustrate the richness and the complexity of this process. A relevant way to understand and to learn about fission is to measure as accurately as possible the properties of the fragments, namely in terms of mass, charge, and kinetic energy. Let's try to understand why. So fission somehow can be viewed as the trajectory of the dynamical evolution as a function of time of a fissioning nucleus, here uranium-236, in its potential energy landscape. Potential energy landscape, it is somehow the energy of the system, the lowest energy at different deformation. So this is a multi-dimensional space, but actually for it's very difficult to see, of course, to visualize, sorry, in many dimensions. So here it is projected on a two-dimensional space as a function of elongation of the fission nucleus and left-right asymmetry, which are two important deformation coordinates in order to describe fission. So what you can see, this landscape is not smooth, but it has many structures. And namely, you can see that when the elongation of the system increases, you can find some valleys which are digged into this landscape. And these valleys actually have been shown to be due to the influence of the shell structure in the nascent fragment as they build up when the system elongates more and more. Depending on which of the valley is more or less energetically favorable, you will have a probability of the system to be more or less trapped in either in this one or in that one. And that means that the fission partition for the mass charge will be different depending on which valley which is populated. These fragments which are formed here, which emerge here at the scission point when the system breaks into two, are what we call the primary fragments. They come out usually excited and rotating, so they will return to their equilibrium ground state deformation by emitting neutrons, which exhaust most of the excitation energy, and gammas, which take most of the angular momentum. And then we have in our detector what we can measure today with unique resolution, what we call the secondary fragment, because evaporation has changed some of its properties. Now we're measuring in the detector the mass of the fragment. We can find which valley or which channel was mostly populated. If we measure in addition the charge, we can discriminate between neutrons and protons. And if we measure the kinetic energy, we have access to the shape at the scission point. Indeed, depending on the shape of the fragments at scission, for example, here you have a partition which correspond to spherical fragments, there will be a very strong Coulomb repulsion between the two, so the fragment will fly apart very fast and you will have a very high kinetic energy. So this instead, on the contrary, if you have two very elongated fragments, like for this valley, for example, we will have a lower Coulomb repulsion, so a lower total kinetic energy, which we detect in the detector. So this is a signature of the shape at scission. Fine, If now, in addition, we are able to measure the neutrons and the gamma, we can recalculate, retrace the excitation energy and angular momentum at the scission point. And all these properties, mass, charge, excitation energy, angular momentum, and shape at the scission point depend on the trajectory on this landscape. So by tracing these back, I would say, we can have access or try to study the dynamics on this landscape. So what was known for several decades about fission fragment properties is summarized here. So mostly we had access to fragment mass distribution with somehow limited resolution. The information on the charge was rather poor because it's very difficult to measure. So here I give some example of charge distribution which were measured for different actinides from uranium to einstattium. So first, most striking is that we have two peaks. That means that there is a heavy fragment and a light fragment, so fission is asymmetric. Second, what is important is to remark that the heavy peak has a constant position independent of the fissioning system, which is about 130, 150 or so here, while the light one is moving. Of course, it's increasing if the mass of the fissioning system increases. If we look in more detail, we can see that this peak actually here is made of two peaks. So there is a substructure, one peak located around mass 134, about here, which was called the S1 fission mode, and which was explained by the influence of the neutron closed spherical neutron shell n equal 82 in the heavy fragment. And the second sub-peak, which we call the S2 fission channel mode, which was in the past said being due to the deformed neutron shell around n equal 82, which is more deformed, so more deformed than this spherical fragment. This interpretation is consistent with the total kinetic energy measurement. So an example here is shown. It is a mean total kinetic energy as a function of the mass of the system. You can see that the kinetic energy is highest here around mass 134, which corresponds to S1, so a compact configuration. Then it's a bit lower for S2 because it's more stretched. And finally, you have a very low total kinetic energy for edge symmetry, which is actually due to the fact that in some cases you have also a symmetric mode, which is due to the macroscopic energy, which we call the super long mode because it corresponds to typically a macroscopic cell which divides into two. So you have two very elongated fragments. This is the interpretation was also found very nicely matching the observation for fermions. Indeed, for very heavy fermium isotopes, it was seen that the mass distribution is not asymmetric like here, but it is very narrow and symmetric. This is because when you get to fermium, so you get to higher masses, so the light peak approaches more and more the heavy one. So finally, they merge together. And around fermium 260, you have the possibility to form two nuclei close to tin 132. That means you have actually 2 times the S1 very compact channel. So you have a single peak in the mass distribution and also very high total kinetic energy. So that's fine. But now in the year 2000, Karl-Heinz Schmidt at GSI managed to measure in a very famous experiment, not the mass, but the charge distribution for several tens of actinides using an innovative technique. And this technique is based on inverse kinematics combined with a powerful heavy ion spectrometer, which was the FRS at that time. And what he observed is summarized here. So here is as a function of the fissioning system mass, the position in charge, so in Z of the heavy fragment, and the position in N, in neutron number. And what was observed is that actually the position of the in charge of the heavy fragment is bunched into 2 groups, one group constantly located around charge 52 and another one around charge 55. On the other hand, a neutron number, there is nothing special. It simply increases steadily with the mass of the fissioning system. That means that as compared to the previous interpretation that neutrons are constantly located at 82 or 88, it seems to be that what is driving the asymmetry of fission is not the neutron number, but the proton number. And namely 2 specific configuration, 2 neutron numbers, 52 and 55. 52 is ascribed to the S1 mode, and 52 was thought about being due to S55, sorry, to S2. These 2 numbers are a bit surprising because they do not correspond to known shells, but okay, this was the result. So still to be understood what is actually behind. I will talk about this later. In addition, this experiment raises the question about which among the 2 nucleons, protons or neutrons, is driving the asymmetry of fission. In order to answer that question, we need to measure, there's only one way, we need to measure in the same experiment the mass and the charge, and of course, what we call isotopic distribution, and as much as possible with unique precision. This was achieved actually only very recently, because it's really a challenge. And it was done in 2 parallel experiments, one at Ganil with VAMOS spectrometer, and one at GSI, it was the SOFIA experiment at the Aladdin spectrometer. The idea is the same as the one of Karl-Heinz Schmidt. So it's again induced fission by using inverse kinematics. But now, of course, instead of using the FRS, both these experiments make use of most advanced heavy ion spectrometer, which developed in the meantime, namely VAMOS at Ganil and Aladdin at GSI. Somehow for patriotic reason, I would say I will here focus on the Ganil experiment. But in both cases, we had the measure, they could measure the mass and charge and kinetic energy distribution for different fission systems with best possible resolution. So for Ganil, some technical details are summarized here. I won't go into these details, but of course, we can get back to it later if you wish. Basically, fission was induced, as I said, in inverse kinematics by shooting the uranium beam from Ganil on light targets like beryllium or carbon. In that case, one exploits the mechanism of transfer-induced fission in order to study in a single experiment different fissioning systems at different excitation energies. Regarding the setup, so VAMOS, the VAMOS spectrometer was used in order to detect one and only one, I insist on that, of fission fragment and identify it fully in mass, charge, and velocity vector at its focal plane. Note that we measure the mass, charge, and kinetic energy at the focal plane. That means that we measure the mass, namely after neutron evaporation, what we call the secondary or post-neutron masses, I would say. So altogether, as I said, in a single experiment, different fissioning system could be studied. Some are listed here with quite excitation energy ranging over quite a wide range. Some results are flashed here. So first, it's here it is a population as a function of N and Z of low energy fission of neptunium-239. There are two bumps for the heavy and for the light fragments because fission is asymmetric. If now we project onto the Z-axis, you can get the integral charge distribution. This is shown here for different fissioning systems at different excitation energy. You can see that there is a staggering. It's because of this, so an even Z effect, and which is due to pairing, proton pairing. One can, of course, also project onto the N-axis, and then one will get something similar for the N distribution. And possibly one could study neutron pairing, but this is somehow more difficult because we measure the secondary fragment, and the proton neutron pairing due to fission is in the primary fragment. Now, in addition, if you measure the secondary fragment, you have the additional effect of evaporation. So somehow we have to disentangle between what is due to evaporation and what is due to fission alone. So it's possible, but let's say that it's less transparent than studying the proton Evenode effect. So altogether, you can see, you can study how this effect depends on the fissioning system and the excitation energy. Another important aspect of such kind of experiment is evolution with the excitation energy in very fine step. So here you have the mass distribution for fission of plutonium-240 at different excitation energy from 8 to 18 MeV. In red, you have the data, and in black, underneath, you have two Gaussian. Actually, this corresponds to what is usually done in order to decompose the distribution in the S1 and S2 mode. So one usually does a multi-Gaussian fit analysis. And you can see, so the contribution for S1, which is here on the left, and from S2 on the right, you can see that this the weight of these two contributions changes with excitation energy. So the population of S1 and S2 changes slowly with the excitation energy. So with such kind of information, you can understand how these changes work. And then this is, of course, related to the dynamics on the potential landscape. So again, you learn about the trajectory and the nuclear properties which act on this trajectory. This and with more detail and even more nice data can be found in these papers. So finally, summarizing the experiment of Karl Schmidt at GSI, Sophia at GSI, and VAMOS at Ganil, they are all consistent and confirm the leading role of proton in driving the asymmetry of fission in the actinides, while neutron, as compared to what was thought up to now, so far, have a minor role or more minor role. And these leading proton effects are in the S1 channel, are signed with the S1 channel, which is located around 52, but actually due to a shell, to the shell at Z equal 50, and S2, which is observed at 55, and according to most recent theory, I will come to it later, it would be due to shell stabilized octupole proton configuration. Here it is maybe important to remark that the observed location of the peaks of 52 and 55 does not necessarily exactly coincide with the location of the shell, here 50 and here 52, 56, because of course it depends on the number of protons which you have in the fissioning system to be shared, and also of the proton which come from the neck, which means that instead of 50, you observe actually 52. But the stabilization, the driving comes from that shell in this example of S1. So according to this knowledge from the actinides, so the fact that shell structure in the nascent fragment play a very important role, it was expected that the fission of a neutron deficient preactinide like mercury 180 would be exclusively symmetric, because you would you favor the formation of two shell stabilized zirconium 90. However, what was measured by Andreev a few years ago is this mass distribution. So you can see that it's actually almost exclusively asymmetric, with a heavy mass sitting around 100 and the light partner around 80. So this was really a surprise, and it raised the question about the possibility of a new type of asymmetric fission, whatever new means, which would be located in another part of the nuclear chart. That result, of course, triggered a very intense work, both in experiment and in theory worldwide, in order to see whether it's really a new type of fission, which was evidenced here. Here are shown some of the results or some representative results which were obtained since the early measurement of Andreev. So first you have some mass distribution from beta delayed fission and charge distribution from electromagnetic induced fission. These are most ideal a mechanism to study this question, because you can reach very low excitation energy. So you are very sensitive to shell effects whenever there are some which affect the process. Unfortunately, with these two techniques, the number of systems available is limited, and also, as you can see, the statistic was poor. That's why since a few years now, people are using worldwide fusion in order to induce fission. But in that case, there is a main drawback, which is the fact that the excitation energy can get pretty high, at least higher than in these two previous techniques. Namely, it can go up to 25 or 40 MeV, what is quite high. And at such excitation energy, shell effects, if any, start to be damped. And also you have the emergence of a symmetric fission mode, which is due only to the macroscopic part of the energy. So you have a mixture of asymmetric and symmetric fission. That means that usually what was measured is it's a single but fast, I would say, peak. In some cases, there was we were very lucky, and there was a little shallow dip in the symmetric region, which suggests that the asymmetric fission is there. And then in order to separate and to extract the asymmetric part, usually we do, like for the actinides, a multi-Gaussian fit analysis. Some example of such fits, sorry, where is my mouse? Oh, yeah, are shown here or there. So summarizing the situation up to recently, that, okay, we have plenty more data in this preactinide region, but you can see that the quality due to statistic and resolution remains rather poor. So they confirm that asymmetric fission is definitely sitting there. So it exists, an island of asymmetric fission in neutron deficient preactinide, but they not much know, nothing actually about its origin and nature. So in order to go beyond this knowledge, what we have proposed is that now to study also this EDVAMOS, and namely to get for the first time the mass, charge, and kinetic energy in that region. because so far we had only mass and charge, but with limited resolution, mass or charge, but with limited resolution. So we decided, since it was very successful, to use the same method as the one used at VAMOS and implemented there for actinides. So we induced fission by fusion in inverse kinematics, shooting the GaNyl xenon beam on iron and producing a fissioning system mercury 178. Then, like before for the actinides, we use VAMOS in order to detect one of the fragments at the focal plane and to characterize it fully in mass, charge, and velocity vector. But now, as compared to the previous setup, for the first time, we coupled to VAMOS a second arm here, which you can see here, in order to detect the fragment in coincidence. So for the first time, we could measure both fragments of the fission event. This arm did not provide also the mass and the velocity vector of the fission partner, but the mass only with some worse resolution as compared to what VAMOS can offer. So being very short and without going to the detail how we can get this, but if you wish I can detail later. With such a setup, with two fragments detected, we can have access to the mass before and after evaporation, that means white excision and after return to equilibrium. So we have the primary and secondary fragment mass, or still sometimes you call it pre-neutron and post-neutron masses. And the same, of course, for the total kinetic energy. So regarding the results, so first with the VAMOS alone, here is what we get. For the correlation between the energy loss and the total energy at the focal plane at VAMOS. So in this BDIM, you can see different lines. Actually, each line corresponds to one single element. So you can see that you can separate these lines. So by gating on one line, you can gate on one Z. That means that you have identified for the first time with this technique at VAMOS the charge of a neutron deficient preactinide. As I said before, and we have already seen for the actinides, we have an excellent resolution for the secondary mass at the focal plane of VAMOS. And now if we gate on charge and we look at the mass, we can have what we call the isotopic distribution. So this is a mass distribution for Z equal 30, and here, for example, for Z equal 35. Okay, now we combine this with, look what we get with the second arm in addition, because this was newly implemented. So using the information of the velocity from VAMOS and from the second arm, we can apply the conservation rules from two-body kinematics, what we call the 2V method. And with that method, we can get the primary mass of the fragment. So this is, but with not that much good resolution as at the focal plane with VAMOS alone. So this distribution, because of simply of the technique and some other detail, which we can get back to it later. So this distribution for the pre-neutron or primary fragment mass is shown here. You can see that as other distribution in that region for fusion-induced fission, there is one main peak, but it's broad, and there is a shallow dip at symmetry, which suggests that it's a mixture of symmetric and asymmetric fission. This can indeed be shown here with some decomposition thanks to the multi-Gaussian fit analysis. For the TKI, it was measured to be single-humped, Gaussian-like in shape and consistent with previous experiments. So that was fine because it's the first time we could get such kind of information of the pre-neutron information at VAMOS. Previously, we had only post-neutron information. But on the other hand, regarding our issue of understanding asymmetric fission in the preactinides doesn't help that much because we have something which basically so far here resembles what was already known. So it was not worth the effort maybe to go to VAMOS in order to get something which is simply consistent with what was already known in that region. To go beyond and to really, we have to really exploit further the combination of VAMOS and this second arm, and this is what is done here. So as I said, thanks to this setup, we could measure the pre-neutron mass, so the primary fragment mass, and the post-neutron mass, so the secondary mass. Now, by subtraction, we can get the neutron multiplicity, that means the number of neutrons emitted by the fragment between scission and after return to equilibrium as a function of its mass. And this is what you get here for our pre-actinide mercury 178. We can see that the neutron multiplicity steadily increases from going from very low, almost zero, neutron emitted for the lightest fragment up to several for the heaviest one. Now, what is important here is to remind or to emphasize that the amount of neutron emitted after scission is directly related actually to the deformation at scission as compared to the deformation at the ground state. This is because when the fragment is formed at scission, and if it is deformed, it will relax in shape to the ground state when it returns to equilibrium. And this shape relaxing, in doing this shape relaxation, the deformation energy is transformed into intrinsic excitation energy. And this intrinsic excitation energy is used to emit neutrons. So that means that the larger the neutron multiplicity, the larger was the change in shape between scission and the ground state. That means that the fragment here, light fragment have a ground state deformation, which have a scission configuration deformation, which is close to the ground state deformation, while the heavy one are very much elongated at scission as compared to ground state, because they need, they transform a lot of deformation energy in excitation energy, and then they emit a large number of neutrons. So this is one information. The second one is that we measure exactly the mass at the focal plane at VAMOS. So we can determine the N over Z, which is displayed here, sorry, my mouse, displayed here as a function of charge of the fragment at the focal plane at VAMOS. So the secondary N over Z. N over Z is an interesting quantity because it is a measure of the neutron richness of the fragment. So we have it for the secondary mass. Now, since you have measured also the neutron multiplicity, we can correct the secondary mass for this evaporation, and you can reconstruct the pre-neutron, the primary N over Z, which is most important because it is what is related to the fission process. And this pre-neutron primary N over Z is displayed here. We can see for the light fragment, it is larger than for the heavy one. That means that the light fragment is more neutron rich than the heavy fragment. And this actually is opposite to what is expected from pure macroscopic consideration, which would have go in the other direction. So according to a macroscopic picture, so if you divide a liquid drop, actually, you would expect the light part being less neutron deficient, less neutron rich than the heavy part. Okay, but this is what we got for our pre-actinide, and we could not anticipate these two results because nothing was known about. So what we knew only is from the actinide. So now if you compare to the actinide, first for the neutron multiplicity as a function of mass, this is typical what you get for the actinide. It has a shape very well known, which is called the sawtooth shape. That means that it increases with mass, but then suddenly you have a drop. And this drop actually occurs at the location of the S1 mode, because in S1 you have a compact scission configuration, as we have seen already, because you form a very closed, very compact, close to spherical fragment, close to 132 tin. So this is has a configuration at scission which is close to the ground state configuration. So there is not much relaxation in shape during scission and return to equilibrium. So the system is less excited in that case, and so only a few neutrons are emitted, and that's why you have this sawtooth shape. Regarding the N over Z, displayed here as a function of charge for two typical actinides also, you can see that roughly there is a positive slope which follows the macroscopic expectation, but there are deviations, of course, from the slope, which are due to microscopic effects. But what is most important to remark here is that the light fragment has an energy which is smaller than the heavy one. That means that it is less neutron rich. That means that for this, it's completely opposite actually to what you have seen now for our preactinide. That means that for these two signature of the fission process, you have something different, somehow a difference between actinide and preactinide. So probably this has to be deepened in order to see what is the physics behind. Maybe we can learn something about. So with this goal in view, what we did is somehow two manipulations. So first, we have the N/Z for actinide and our preactinide. And there is a macroscopic contribution and the microscopic one. In order to get rid of the macroscopic part, which we can control and easily calculate for actinide and preactinide, we subtract from the measurement this macroscopic prediction in order to extract only the contribution from the microscopic part of the energy. That means from the shell effect of the fragment. And this difference is displayed here as a function of charge of the fragment for our preactinide in black, and for two typical actinides. And what we do see that for the region in Z where actinide and preactinide fission overlap, all data fall on one line, on one single line. That means that the microscopic, the shell effect, which is responsible for this neutron richness in the fragment, is the same for actinides and actinides. And since its scales, they fall on the same line when they are sorted according to Z, it means that it is the charge, that means the proton shell structure, which is behind this microscopic effect. This is even the more emphasized if you remark that for a given Z, depending on whether it is an actinide or the preactinide fission, the N is completely different. For example, for Z equal 42, the fragment has a neutron number around 56 for our preactinide and 66 for an actinide. But the microscopic effect in the N/Z is the same. That means that really it's not related to the neutron number, but to the proton number. So it's proton which is driving. Now, regarding the neutron multiplicity, here again, some manipulation, namely, I display now the neutron multiplicity, not as a function of mass, but as a function of charge, as we measured for our preactinide in black, and I overlay with what is typical of the actinide, so the sawtooth shape. Of course, they overlap only in that region. And what you can see is that in the region where they overlap, the multiplicity is exactly the same when we display it as a function of Z. On the contrary, if we display it as a function of neutron number in the fragment, there is no overlap. So that means that, again, here what is behind the value of the neutron multiplicity is not the neutron number, but it's the proton number. So it's because it's driven by the proton number. And as we said earlier, this neutron multiplicity is directly related to the magnitude of the shape relaxation after scission. That means that this shape relaxation is driven by the proton. That means that the shape at scission is related actually to a proton stabilized configuration. That means that altogether we have for sorry, if I come back, our range in Z, where there is an overlap between, let's say, 30 and 50. That means between the two magic shell, actually, what is driving the asymmetric fission is the proton subnucleon system. This is actually very consistent with a very old prediction by Wilkins. Here I report his picture. So this is for the proton shell correction as a function of proton number and deformation, elongation typically. The range in Z which we cover for actinides and preactinides, where the overlap is encircled tiers between the two shells, Z equal 28 and 50. And we can see that across this range, there is a ridge with very high proton shell correction for our preactinide in width, and of course over the same range in Z, you can go along that ridge for actinide fission. You go from very lowly deformed system close to the Z equal 28. So basically here you have a low deformation which is close, excision which is close to the ground state deformation. So you relax only a little in shape. That means you have less excitation energy. So you emit only a few neutrons, as you have seen. And for larger Z, so for heavier fragment, you start to have a scission configuration which is very elongated, much different from the ground state deformation. So you relax after scission a lot in shape, so you gain a lot of excitation energy, so you emit a large amount of neutrons. Now, if you look at the same picture by Wilkins, but for the neutron shell correction, so neutron shell correction as a function of neutron number and as a function of deformation, the neutron range we are, for this blue actinide Z range, the neutron range which is we have to consider is this one here, encircled in blue. And we can see that over that neutron range, if I display the same, if I look at the same range in deformation length here, so between 0 up to 0.8, if I display so an arrow between this here, this line, this one, and here, you get this, and you can see that luckily or unluckily, you meet also a ridge of very strong neutron shell correction. That means that in actinide fission, the fragments have over the range in Z and N which they cover, they have actually both a strong neutron correction, shell correction, and proton shell correction. That means that you are not able to discriminate which among neutrons and protons is driving this process and this increase in deformation between the two magic shells. Now for our preactinide, the range of in N we are concerned with for this wide range in Z is actually here, so it is smaller. So again, now if over this range I go from deformation 0 to 0.8, you can see that I do not meet any specific strong shell correction in the neutron subsystem. That means that it's really the protons which are driving the process and which explain why we have and it's that we have a very elongated up to a very elongated scission configuration, because such kind of deformed proton configuration would be stabilized by shell structure. Now, in order to have some overview of the region, because now a few tens of systems have been measured in our preactinide region, here with the Indian colleague, we made a systematics analysis, and the outcome is illustrated with these two pictures. First, you have the charge of the light fragment in the preactinide region and the heavy fragment for different methods to induce fission, fusion-induced fission, beta-delayed fission, electromagnetic-induced fission, as a function of charge of the fissioning system. So that means that you have the charge as a function in the fragment as a function of the charge, the number of protons to be shared from the fissioning system. And the same for the number of neutrons in the light fragment, in the heavy fragment, as a function of number of neutrons of the fissioning system. So the amount of neutrons to be shared. What do we see? We see that actually the neutron numbers increases steadily with the number of neutrons to be shared, so nothing special, I would say. And but for the charge, you can see that the charge of the light fragment is about constant, located around the charge 36, plus a few uniques due to the uncertainty, while the charge of the heavy fragment is simply increasing depending on the size of the fissioning system. That would mean that what drives asymmetric fission in our preactinides is the charge of the light fragment. Important to note also that there is nothing special, no special role played by the neutron number n equal 15, because there is nothing special, no specific stabilization around that number. This stabilization was thought very surprising, because nothing special is supposed, according to the shell model, to happen at this Z value. But according to most recent calculation, which I detail later, it would also be due to, like for the actinide, to be due to an octupole deformed stable configuration at scission. So taking altogether the information which you have now collected from actinides and pre-actinide, you can say that what is driving asymmetric fission over this region, this large region of the nuclear charge, is due to the proton nuclear structure and not to the neutron. At least this is the leading effect. And the three leading effects are the Z = 50 spherical shell, the shell which would be due to stabilized octupole configuration around 55, and an additional one due also to octupole stable configuration around 36. On top of that, there is also to some extent the influence of the macroscopic part of the energy, basically the symmetry energy. So the final distribution is then somehow a mixture among these effects. But these are the four leading effects which explain the fission on this part of this wide domain of the nuclear charge. Now, a last point, since the actinide asymmetric fission of mercury 180 resemble much the fission of typical actinide like uranium, plutonium. We try to see whether we can connect actually these two islands of asymmetric fission in the actinide and pre-actinide, whether you have it's unique or something, whether they share, there is some connection, or if you have really two distinct region. And in order to do that, I display here the nuclear chart, or the heavy part, let's say, with our new region of pre-actinide fission, asymmetric pre-actinide fission, the old actinide region, and the fermium region. Unfortunately, there is, so in black, sorry, you have the typical known measurements. In red, you have a calculation, which I will detail later. Unfortunately, there is no region, there are gaps in between the different regions. So we don't know whether there is a connection between the different regions. And if you look at each region separately, so for instance, in the pre-actinide, we start here from southwest with very asymmetric distribution. Maybe you cannot see, but please believe me. Then you go to more and more, you go to triple hump distribution, so mixed symmetric and asymmetric, and then finally you have almost exclusively symmetric fission. In the actinide region, you start from symmetric fission and progressively you end with almost only asymmetric fission. And in the fermium region, you start from asymmetric fission and you end with exclusively symmetric fission. As we have shown, explained earlier, in actinide fission, what explains this is a mixture of two fission modes, S1 and S2. In the fermium region, we have almost only S1. And in our pre-actinide region, we have now learned that there is an additional mode which would be located around Z = 36. In order to somehow to see whether there is a connection or some consistency between this different region, we can look at the polonium-210, because this guy is located at a very interesting position on the nuclear charge. It is here. That means that its neutron number is typical of our actinide region, which we know well, and its proton number is typical of the pre-actinide one, which we have now discovered, and we have some information on it. And luckily, this system was, fission of this system was measured now, I would say, so almost 30 years ago by Itkis and collaborator. And this is the mass distribution which he cut in black here. And the achievement of Itkis is that he could put in evidence two weak shoulders here for this guy, and which he attributed to the remaining effect of S1 and S2. Also, it is not dominant, but still there was some remaining in that nucleus. Also, it was not a typical actinide. Regarding the symmetric region, Itkis said that there is a very important super long as a macroscopic contribution, but he was not able to explain exactly its top, which was a flat and maybe a very shallow deep. Now, as compared to what Itkis knew, at that time, we know that in addition, we should have some stabilization around z equal 36. So if we put in our multi-Gaussian fit analysis, not only the super long symmetric S1 and S2, which is kissed mu, but if we add what we have just discovered, this z equal 36, we can nicely, very nicely explain the full shape and namely the flat top. That means that there is actually here also a remaining part from this 38. That means that actually there is not, it's not two distinct region of asymmetric fission as such do not exist, but there is a smooth evolution between the two. And once you have taken into account these 4 effects, which are the leading effect, of course, neutron may also play a role at some point, but the major effects are played by these 4 proton configuration. If you take this into account, you can explain rather well the whole chart, at least the fission in the heavy part of the nuclear chart. Regarding theory, since with this new experimental data, new and very accurate data which we have now, theory is very interested in that and investing a lot of effort in order to explain. Unfortunately, ab initio calculations are not yet possible because our nuclei are much too heavy. There is a very important progress recently in fully microscopic self-consistent theories beyond mean field or beyond mid field. You have also the continuous development since 20 years now at least of so-called macro microscopic model. And also due to the need for application of fast and very flexible code, we have several more and more elaborate semi-empirical models. For microscopic and macroscopic approaches, here you have different types of approaches, either purely statistical or static approaches and or dynamical ones. That means which compute time step by time step the evolution of the system of the potential landscape and the progressive reaching of fission. But of course, this is much more involved and takes much more time than a pure static approach. But in principle, this is the truth. Now, in spite of the progress, I would say that there are still quite some unknowns about some of the inputs which are needed by such kind of calculation. So they all have still some degree of phenomenology, I would say. Also, you have some problem related to the fact that you cannot take into account all degrees of freedom because there are too many in fission. So you have to neglect some, and of course the question is which one can be neglected and which one cannot because they are too important. So there are some debates on this. And finally, of course, you have also still the issue of computing times, which can be for most advanced theories very large, too large at least for application. That means that the predictive power remains somehow hazardous, I would say. Usually you can achieve a good description, but it's tuned case by case, but in order to go beyond what is the region which is well known, it's somehow hazardous. But it's promising, and just to illustrate how promising it is, I mentioned here, I come back to the theory which I mentioned already 2 times during this presentation, namely time-dependent microscopic mean field calculation by Guillaume Scamps and Cédric Simonel, who explained asymmetric fission in actinides as driven by octupole stable proton configuration around 52 and 56. So this seems to be confirmed, at least by experiment, at least it's the first very consistent explanation of the experimental observation. For the preactinides, they expect also octupole stabilized configuration around 34, as we have, which is very close to our experimental observation. But in parallel, they say also that there is a different octupole configuration due to the neutron number around 52 and 56, and that this would dominate, what is opposite to what we have seen in experiment. That means that still there is some work to be done in order to understand this proton effect in the preactinide fission. So unfortunately, such a theory or calculation with such an elaborate theory over the full chart doesn't exist yet because it's very time demanding. So what I compare here to the experiment, which I remind is in black, is a calculation done with semi-empirical Jeff model, which is a very, it's a semi-empirical model, but it's very elaborate. The best one can do today. I think everybody would agree with this. And the predictions are shown here in red, and looking in some detail, which again, you may not see, but please believe me, if you go to the center of each island, you can see that Geff can describe the result very well. But as soon as you go to the edge, there's some deviation. Namely, the amount of symmetric and asymmetric fission is not properly under control. That means that we still have to work on the competition between asymmetric and symmetric fission. The main effects which is behind the asymmetry is understood, but the competition between the different channels, so between the dynamics, I would say, is still to be deepened and to be studied. Yeah. And the code like Geff, which is fast and flexible, is not a fundamental theory, but it can help the development of the fundamental theories. It can help for guidance, I would say. So last, I cannot resist in showing you this picture, which is somehow a summary of actinide and preactinide region. So here is displayed as a function of charge of the fissioning system, the charge of the light fragment and of the heavy fragment in our preactinide region and in the actinide region. Here we recognize the almost constant position in the preactinide around 36. The heavy one is just moving, like with increasing with the number of protons to be shared from the fission nucleus. In the actinide, we recognize S1 and S2 on 52 and 55, and the light one, which is just following. There is some nice connection between the two at the meeting point, you can see here. But now, what is interesting for the people is what happens beyond. So here in the rare earth region and in the super heavy region. Does the different lines simply cross? That means that the light and the heavy fragment change, reverse the role, or does something new happen? Some theory expect that they simply cross, some elaborate theories, while some other also elaborate theory expect the emergence of still some new phenomena, and namely a type of what they call a lead radioactivity, because they say that super heavy fission can start to be influenced by the proximity of one of the fragments to proximity to lead 208. But this is really now a debate. What happens in that region? What is, of course, as you may anticipate, important for studying super heavy elements. So last, I conclude very briefly. Just I hope that I convinced you that fission is a very interesting, intriguing, but also very complicated process, which you have still much to learn about. Very important in order to investigate it is to measure as complete as possible information with many different observables in order to be sure not to miss any effect. And this is best accuracy, namely for the mass, the charge, and the total kinetic energy. And what is important also is to measure, to cover in the measurement wide domain of the nuclear charge. So not only actinide, because as you see, we could not discriminate between neutron and proton effect, but also other region, and namely this neutron deficient preactinide region, which was then able to bring some more information and to decide between neutron and proton influences. There are many perspectives, of course, and I will not bother you further with that right now, but it's probably, maybe, I hope, for our next presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.